All right, well, we'll do it that way. So our recording software is deciding to be a little glitchy here. So in your assignments this week, we listed a bunch of passwords, and hopefully you looked at those. And we know that these passwords are horrible. There's no way around it. Use some common sense. So when you write rules for passwords, try to eliminate as many of those and educate people. If you have employees writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password, you can stay in there, Hannah. It's okay. Okay. Educate people. But as we looked at like that Ashland Madison one where you'd think people would try to be as secure as possible even on that. No. People, especially when they get under pressure, are uniquely dumb. We know that not only are they going to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on one account, but they're going to use it on multiple accounts. So we need to be aware of what people are doing. Training is one answer. You can also do some password auditing, and you can look at things to make sure that you don't have those kinds of passwords in your system. But it still happens. Large companies, SolarWinds, the password into SolarWinds attack was SolarWinds123. And it all got blamed on an intern, which we have some. Yeah, it probably was. So, all right. So, go back to where I was. So we know that those rules, and we can have time of day, but one of the things we want to emphasize is least privilege. And I know it's hard sometimes to think because we're used to, hey, I'm going to get in front of this computer and I can add and do anything I want. And the balance of that is then I have to ask IT for anything I need to do. So there can be some compromise. And one of the ways that we do that is a lot of times we will give people 2 accounts. Now, of course, now they have to keep track of 2 usernames, but they have a normal user that they use for all their normal purposes. And then we give them an account with administrative rights. So do we give everybody that? No. But obviously there's some people in the office or the CEO may need that for some reason so that they can install software and things, and then it's still your fault when everything goes wrong. If we keep that in place, that idea of least privilege, this is an area where Linux and Unix and the POSIX style systems are much better because by default you're in a limited account and you have to elevate to a privilege where you can change something. So what it really does is it makes it harder for things like drive-by spam to get installed, or if you get an email that wants to run a file, and all of a sudden you get a pop-up box saying, hey, do you really want to run this file and enter your admin credentials? Maybe it'll reset your brain a little bit, and you'll say, oh man, that's probably not a good idea. I should think about this. It looks very suspicious. But if they have administrative rights, in other words, they can do anything on that individual computer, and they get a file in an email and they just click on it and it runs, well, now we have ransomware and other things that we probably have to deal with. So least privilege is one of the things that I would like to emphasize. So auditing, and not financial auditing, although this does play in a little bit. So like a yearly security matrix overview. Who has rights, who doesn't have rights, who has rights to what software, because sometimes during a year or a 6-month period or however we want to schedule these, people get job titles that are changed and they move, or we sometimes miss somebody in HR. So once we go through those, we can actually say, all right, these people actually need all these privileges. And so it can be driven by HR. It can be driven by individual departments when you send out, hey, I need to recertify who's all needs access and to what. And it makes everybody aware what those privileges and what those usages are. So it's not a bad thing. It's a pain in the butt. It takes time. But it gets rid of a lot of that headache and people who have changed jobs and now they're assigned the proper properties, and we haven't just said, oh man, the system's really screwed up today. I'm going to give Joe Blow access to everything just so he can get through his day, and then we forget about it. And then at the end of the year, they've still got usage there. So part of that, we also see how often people are using things. Maybe they don't need particular rights. So these are sometimes hard in a smaller company. These are really sometimes kind of hard. And one of them we want to look at is best practices of things like duties. Do I want the same person, and think of it from an accounting standpoint, do I want the same person doing payroll as doing time accounting and is doing cost out, cost in? No, we really want to break those up, because if you're going to commit fraud accidentally or on purpose, and we do have issues sometimes accidentally, the more I have those things separated, the more it's harder for multiple people then to collude to do that. So separation of duties you're going to see in a lot of areas. You're going to see it if you're in finance or in banking or any of those areas, that we clearly delineate who has control of sometimes like the checks, for example. In a smaller business where it's a single owner, it's really hard to tell the owner that, hey, you shouldn't be able to do all of these items. We need to break those down. And so sometimes in smaller businesses, it's a little harder to do. But the same guy taking invoices in shouldn't be the one paying them out. So money coming in, one hand, money going out in a separate person. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the idea of job rotation. So job rotation involves moving you around. So that serves a couple of purposes. One, you understand what other jobs do and how they work, so that in case there is an issue of personnel, you can assume those duties. But the other thing it does from a best practices standard is it lets you see what's going on and can interrupt if somebody's doing something wrong. So if somebody, for example, in payroll has created some fake employees and is creating payroll checks for them, and you're rotating jobs, so now you're doing payroll for 6 months, you might notice, hey, there are some people here that I have never met. Where did these names come from? And why are these checks all getting sent to the same person? So it gives us a little bit of that idea of we can see what else is going on. The same way with this idea of mandatory vacations. So a lot of times people in like comptroller positions, anytime you're in a highly sensitive area, will sometimes force vacations on you. And the reason we do that is if you've got something that you're not supposed to be doing going on, we can actually see what's going on because you're gone now. And so you're off the job. We also do that.
What if you're not supposed to be doing it, but what you were doing with the entire company that got there?
And that happens. People have changed how things are doing, or they've come up with some model to do things that isn't company approved, and we find out about it during those. And it may be what actually is making the company run. It may not be because I'm embezzling from the company. It may be that I've figured out a way to keep the company afloat, and that actually does happen. So that's a great thought. The mandatory vacations, out. So one of the other things that we'll also do is in most IT-type jobs, and in fact in a lot of jobs, you're going to find out if you put in your notice, you're walked out the door that day. And you'll probably be paid for that 2-week notice, depending on the policy of the company. But the reason is if you're no longer employed there, or you know that you're going to leave, do we want you on our staff any longer? Now, what we'll usually do is say, hey, we'll call you in the next couple of weeks while you're off in case we need some information from you. But if you're already going over to the competition or doing something else, we probably don't want you on board. You're generally, the last 2 weeks, some of you've probably quit from a job. You probably didn't give 100% the last couple of weeks. You may be toxic to other employees. So depending on what industry, there may be some regulations about how we have to handle it. Certainly some people with licenses, so if you have a mental health license, for example, you have to give 30 days notice. So there's different businesses in different areas, but it helps with that idea of getting rid of problematic or eliminating any problems. So, and we've actually seen that vacation idea is pretty tough to walk in and say, hey, by the way, you're going to get 2 weeks off. Yes, and sometimes it's extra time, but if we have any suspicion something odd is going on, that's a pretty common tactic to do. The book talks about the clean desk policy, and in other words, everything's off your desk. Well, that helps if I'm in there walking through, because I've come in with the cleaners, all the stuff that should be locked away is locked away. It's not because we care if your desk looks like a pile. we're trying to figure out how to make sure that's all gone. So that eliminates things like sticky notes on your monitor with the password, hopefully, or underneath the keyboard, or, hey, I have this keyboard drawer that slides out, and I'm going to tape all the information to it. So part of that is making sure things are locked up as they should be, because you may not be the only person in that office. So we talked a little bit about this idea of separation of duties. So it really is just a common sense thing. Job rotation. The other one that they talk about is the idea of it eliminates burnout. And we've all had that. If you do the same thing over and over and over and over, so if you work at Burger King and you flip Whoppers every day, you get tired of flipping Whoppers. It's really one of the reasons I love my job here at Peru, because I never know. Yes, I come into the classroom, but I never know what other challenges and weird things we're going to come up with. And so some people like that routine, and they will do the same thing over and over again. Some people can't stand it. They need to be up and moving and change. So that vacations is a great way that we can do these kinds of checks and make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's not necessarily an insult to you to say, hey, we think you're cheating, because if we really suspect it, we're going to go in a little more in depth, and we're probably not going to tell you until the end. But this clean desk, really everything locked, cabinets closed, not leaving your keys hanging in the lock, which I've seen. So how do we deal with laptops? So either thrown in a drawer, and we're seeing this more because now most companies are buying a laptop and a docking station. Well, your offices are not attended all the time just by you, and in a lot of cases you can't lock their offices. So my wife's is an example. We went actually in there, and it's been a year since she's been in her office. First thing we noticed, the monitors are missing off her desk. And so she's got her dock up there. We're going to print some documents out, and her monitors are gone. Dock's still there, monitors gone. Wait a minute, this is a problem. So we had to track down and email the IT guy once we got back home and figure out what was going on at her business. And they had borrowed them for another employee because they know that Cheryl's out of the office at least until they decide all those employees can come back. But it made for an interesting moment. But in there, they also have in this building, because it's not owned by UNL, they have a cleaning company that comes by. Well, those employees have access to every room in there. And if she had left her laptop there also and the laptop's gone, wouldn't have known for, in most cases, several days to months at this point, because how do you know that item is gone? Laptops have a lot of information. They're easy to grab. So a lot of desks now have a locking cable, a Kensington lock. I think they're pretty cumbersome. Throw it in a drawer or a filing cabinet. It's pretty easy usually to undock them. Throw them in. And make sure all your important documents are locked up, that they're secure. So if your filing cabinet is open. Now, there are some caveats to that, because one of the other things I've discovered in offices is most filing cabinets and locks, there's really not a huge variety of different keys. So my wife's entire office system with filing cabinets and everything, all use the same key. That's pretty handy, but it is also a really easy key to just grab because it's out there for all this Han furniture like that. So you do have to be aware of some limitations of that. And so if you have truly secured materials, it might well be that you need a filing cabinet that has a unique lock and not the $49 model from, well, I used to say Shopko, but apparently Shopko's no more. So the $49 one from Walmart or whatever it is. So we also have technology solutions that we can use. So if we're using Active Directory, we can push out solutions based on putting people into groups, and so we can control who and where and what. And part of that is using something called access control list. So an access control list can tell us who can access what files, what information. So we can do it inside of programs like databases or enterprise resource systems, payroll systems. So it really is that idea that we control who has access. So it's a positive control. Not everybody's locked out, but you have to have least privilege. In other words, you have to have a flag or an indicator that says, yes, I have access to that item. So here at the college, when I log in and I want to go look at some of the file shares that are out there, there's a lot of them I can see. I can't actually access them, though. And that's that idea of using those controls through group properties that, hey, as a faculty, I get access to this U drive, but I don't get access to the admission drive, for example. So we can monitor and control them that way. So group policies. I would hate to imagine how many group policies we currently have on our campus. It's probably a fairly long list, but it's a way we can centrally manage all those computers and devices out there, or a lot of them. So we're going to run through pretty quickly some of these ideas that are out there. So all of these really are a way to perform an identity and make sure that you're accessing the correct services. So Radius was originally developed way back when they had dial-up. And most of you have never had the torturous experience of using dial-up, but it was originally set up so you would dial up and get access to certain advantages. So it's been modified and tweaked over the years. So we can still use pieces of that. So you're logging into the system and it says, oh, this is where you can go, this is what you can do, and it logs how long you've been in, what files you're accessing. So in a lot of cases, it also works through the wireless and your wireless service. So when you log into wireless here, you log in and you give them some user information and a password, and it also will then route you in the appropriate ways on the wireless. Part of the way they do that is something called Kerberos. And it's an authentication system. It wasn't developed by Microsoft or anybody else, but it really gives you kind of like a temporary license and says, here, you have a license. We're giving it to you for a certain amount of time. We're going to take it back. It also can include then what instructions you can get to or what information. And it has that default where it's going to disappear. So on the Linux side, we have something that's used called Taxus. So similar to Radius, so it gives that user information. And again, it's used on a lot of wireless products so that even though you're on wireless, you get the same restrictions as you would if you were on a wired system. So we can control who gets access to what networks. And, for example, guests have very little privileges. They can basically surf the web, and that's all they can get to. So we can do it that way. So this just really shows, and one of the advantages to Taxus is all the communication back and forth is encrypted. And that's really the biggest difference for me, because Radius sends it essentially unencrypted. And so if you're running something like Wireshark, you're grabbing those packets, well, you're going to get all that data, and you're going to be out of luck, unfortunately. So in terms of security, and then we have our friend LDAP. So lightweight directory, and all kinds of services use this. And it's a way that we can have information stored on a central repository, and all different kinds of programs and information systems can grant user access based on information stored in that directory service. So sometimes you'll hear it referred to as like X500. So it's not necessarily the most secure. So there are pieces now that encrypt it, and that's actually good. But it does have some shortcomings, and one of them that it's fallen victim to is the inputs weren't really very sanitized, so you could actually put scripting code into the inputs, and very similar to a SQL injection attack, you could actually get into the system without being truly in the system, in terms of you're not got an account because you're running commands instead of putting in a username. So most of them now have actually upgraded their systems. so that they're not as subject to that idea of injection attacks. But not all, unfortunately. Well, we teach and look at XML, Extensible Markup Language, in our web design course. And XML is more than just what you're going to create on the web. It's a containerized system for almost any type of transaction. So there is an XML language developed specifically for business and accounting. There is one developed, so SAML is developed for security processes. So everything is contained. It's a markup language. In other words, it's got flags on each end when you've seen it. And so we can containerize all our data. So if you do a single sign-on system, for example, most of the single sign-on systems really use SAML. So it's got a predefined format. It's an industry standard for the most part. So business to business, we can conduct logins. So they won't let me into the back web of some of this, but my guess is our single sign-on, where we're signing in once and going through into Blackboard now, is actually on the back end being done with SAML. It's kind of the most common thing we're doing at this point for single sign-on systems. So we can also encrypt that entire XML file. So it kind of looks like this. And if you remember back long ago when we talked about TCP packets having that handshake, it's kind of similar. So it actually, if you look at this, we attempt to get a service. It gets a request, sends it back to identity provider. So there's some kind of third party or a single sign-on provider that actually then authenticates you and sends it back so that you can be verified and logged in. So kind of that same way, you've got the authentication occurs differently than where the data is actually stored in most cases. So we can use this third party then. So this same provider here can work with multiple different service providers, multiple different softwares inside if you're using it. And so in the best case system, you walk into your company and they give you a card, or you're just using a biometric or an identity, and you actually only have to log in once. Everything else is done on that idea of single sign-on. So it makes your life a little easier. It's a lot easier for administrators also, because at the end result, say you decide to quit, I can kill all of your accounts at once by killing your single sign-in. You see this actually when you see wireless, for example. You see the words EAP. So it's another protocol or another format of a language. And that also works for encryption. So we can send and receive data. We won't go into the details of it because, quite frankly, it's fading a little bit except in some wireless issues. Most of the time now we're using some other technologies. So we have some tools. It's not all doom and gloom. Even though I said users are idiots, passwords are idiots. But some of that relies on us still having some common sense. If you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as your user password in a single sign-on system, I hope it doesn't allow you, because that would make me very, very sad. But that probably shows a lack of training of employees. So here's the good news. You guys realize we really only have 4 weeks left? And those of you that are graduating, are you scared and ready to find a job? Yeah. We don't want you to graduate. Good students, we don't want to graduate. We'll keep you around for an extra year. It's like a red shirt year. The look on your two faces is like, whoa, no, what? No, I'm gone. I'm out. All right, so let's talk about what you have to do this week to make sure you get them done. When I looked, it looked like about half of the people had actually done these already, so I was kind of excited. So there is these 2 assignments here, the lab simulations. And then there is this week 12 assignment. So pick one of those. They're in the back of the book. Remember, you almost always have to go, for whatever reason in Cengage, you have to go click on the I want to view the entire book to get to the end of each chapter. I wish I could explain it, but I lack the capacity to deal with Cengage. So, in those, as you go through there, screenshots are a great way to record what you're doing, or some of these actually have questions and say, all right, here's what it is. So, a couple of quick points in there, though. Option 2, you have to turn in a 6-slide PowerPoint slide. Ooh. The SAML, you have to do, or have the option of doing, a 3 to 5 minute quick YouTube video. So we're giving you some options, letting you try out some new formats. I know we all hate typing papers, right? Yeah, so something different to try that. So if you emailed me and you said, I really want to do number 1, but I want to do it as a YouTube video, my answer is going to be, sure, why not? If you say, hey, I'd really like to create a PowerPoint slide for option 1, probably that'll work. So I have some flexibility. I was just trying to stretch our legs a little bit as we get towards the end of the year. The other thing that we want to look at is a discussion board. Somewhere down here. So this, what we're really looking for is recent attacks, because next week we're going to talk about those, and I have an attack very close to us that I kind of predicted, and hey, guess what? It happened. So, and weirdly, it happened about 30 miles from my original hometown. So, we're going to talk about it, how it happened, and the consequences of such things. So, that's it for this week. We kind of plug away the next couple of weeks, and then we're out of here for graduation. All right. How many of you are graduating in here? Nobody else? Reese, you're around for another year or 2 or 4? 2 more? How many years you got left, Hannah? 2? Oh, just 1? Nice. All right. So I'm assuming you guys are going to graduation and actually going to walk in our weird modified thing. I think that's something last year we missed a lot. Students who graduated, it was just kind of like this vacuum of, oh, you graduated, no, whatever. So I encourage you to do that. If you have not enrolled because you're not graduating, get on it. I notice there's a lot of students when we look through the list that haven't enrolled yet. And I know with the corona and the weird thing, but by fall, and I saw they were sending out emails to students now about registering for vaccines here on campus. I hope by fall we're back to where we can actually come into the lab. We don't have to be quite as far apart, and we can actually go back to some kind of normality in our campus. All right, let's get out of here.